Go for it, Sam.
Welcome to our weekly container security group meeting. So today, we actually have a couple other agenda items. So we've got Alan has a demo for cluster image scanning, which is great. Really excited. We've got the first version of that out in alpha. So if you have time, check it out. We've got our documentation on the website too. So mostly for today, I wanted to just have a brainstorming, open-ended discussion, see if we can come up with any good ideas for a good solution on how to improve the container scanning matching. It's a really hard problem to solve. And fundamentally, the problem is that right now, the way it works in GitLab, the findings are properly deduplicated if your images follow the naming strategy that we expect. And if you also have the branching strategy that we expect, but some users have different branching strategies and they also have different naming conventions for their images. And the net result of that is that the findings are not properly deduplicated between the other branches and the master branch. So we're looking to provide some more flexibility for users who have different approaches there. And again, it's a tricky problem to solve. So just wanted to kick it off with that and see if we can come up with any good ideas on how to solve that. And I'm sorry, it's really late my time. So I'm just coming in here trying to get my head into what we're doing.
I know the feeling. That's me at 6:30 in the morning.
First thing in the morning, yeah. So I know one of the ideas was to let users put in, basically a regular expression or otherwise customize how that pattern matching would work. But there are some downsides to that Tiago, you called out around.
Even Adam before me, actually, but mostly about the instability of the fingerprint that will be generated, right? So if somebody changes that, then all of a sudden you get as many new findings as they were previously handled. That was the main downside. So then we discussed locking that, making that like, okay, once you've set this, you can't undo it. After that, I don't think I've written this anywhere, but there's been a magic set of console commands to kind of declare bankruptcy and start again.
Yep.
That I think could come in handy here. So if you find yourself in a situation where, you know what, I need to change and reset things, then maybe that'll be an interesting thing to consider. I know that Matt has been waiting to see a more solid use case for this, because every now and then it's really the one-off request before making that part of the product. What else?
Good point. That actually could, I agree. I think that's a great idea. If you were to change that pattern match, that regular expression for any reason, you might also want to just wipe out all of the previous container scanning findings and start clean at that point.
Yeah. What else to be considered? So I think, Sashi, you can keep me honest here, but I think every solution that we thought about has a dependency on tracking vulnerabilities in the non-default branch. Yeah, and that's something that's not supported at the moment. It'll be something for threatening sites to look at and put in. So as you said, Sam,
that dependency, could you explain that a little bit more? I don't fully understand why that's a dependency for this.
So there are two different things here in this issue that I see. One is what do you use as a fingerprint to compare, and then because the image name has the name of the branch, that then becomes part of the it can become part of the fingerprint, which means if you're using a different branching scheme or release scheme, now you might be getting different findings depending on what you call that what that branch. The other problem there is the compare base, right? So imagine you've got a customer that doesn't deploy from master, or maybe they deploy from master to a production environment, and they deploy from staging to a staging environment, and they've got a workflow that tells them, hey, you got to do staging, then master. So then what happens in these situations is that not only you want to track vulnerability master, you want to track them in staging as well. And when you're first merging, you don't want to compare. So say you create a feature branch to implement something, you don't want to compare the results of that scan with master. You want to first compare them to staging, because you might have fixed something already in staging. You don't want to keep coming up with that. So then the problem there is, if staging is not the default branch, now you can't do that comparison. Or if staging is the default branch and master isn't, now you can't compare to the master branch. So you can only compare to one target.
So with this approach, I'm not trying to solve for all of those different, all of those different workflow scenarios, because I think that's a bigger problem than what we've got here. And
yeah,
the threat insights group is more suited to solve anyway for everyone. Whenever that does come up on their roadmap. But really, I'm looking at customers, even suppose you're still just following the default flow of merging into your default branch and releasing off of your default branch. If your naming strategy for your images differs from what we expect, like if you have the branch name in the tag, then it throws it off. So like
then you're not supported, basically.
Right. So I think, we don't need to solve everything with this iteration, but even just like the example in that proposal description says, if you've got a master branch and a feature branch here, and the branch name is in the tag, it's not going to properly
correct
duplicate. So
I think this helps. In fact, you might have mentioned that, and I forgot, and I'm still thinking before you mentioned that. So that does reduce the complexity a little bit.
Yeah, so I know I've talked about different branching strategies, and that's even how I kicked off this discussion, was mentioning different branching strategies. But yeah, we definitely should de-scope this to just focus on the use case of different image names, but still, we don't want to solve that broader problem yet. That's outside of the scope of this epic. Let's just focus on when the user is merging from a branch into the master branch, how can we make sure that things are always properly deduplicated, regardless of their image naming strategy? Might be a better way to word it.
Cool. So then, Sashi, going off on the, sorry, I'm on the epic. I want to be on the latest spike. Because that I think that issue here is showing the epic. Let me link to the spike. Latest spike. So with this, Sashi, does that make some of the proposals a bit easier? So I'm looking at this post here. Right, so basically Sam's example.
This was just to document how it works currently. So in the proposal, another comment down there, I'm still working on the POC following that approach, using the CS-based image as the base image against which the all the images should compare against. It is still at the POC, I would say, because it's there are a lot of cases it doesn't work, and there are few performance issues as well. in terms of reading the value of the CS-based image from the CIML file, that is quite a bit not performant one. So, but overall it works fine, the approach that I mentioned. So what I did was the CS-based image, it extracts that value only for the pipeline that runs against a non-default branch. So if it runs on a default branch, it would not compare against the CS-based branch. So let's say we have two branches, the master and the feature branch. The feature branch pipeline would construct the fingerprint using the base image, which it should be the image of the default branch. So that way the fingerprint generated would be same as what it is in the default branch. And with reduplication, it would pick up and it would be reduplicated. So that worked fine. But there are a few questions on that. If the customer needs to update the default branch or the default image, then that use case might not work properly as they expect. Because then the fingerprint would again change and the newly generated vulnerabilities would be duplicated again because the fingerprint changed. So that is one problem that I face now, but yeah.
I was going to say, so for that one, that might be at the point where say, hey, if you want to change this, you're better off resetting your findings and vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that if that would be fine to do that. If we change the base image variable, then we'll just reset all the vulnerabilities and then it again start afresh.
Yeah, I mean, I don't expect it to be a common use case for customers to be changing that variable, right? Like you set it up for the project and it really should just be stable. It's going to be really a unusual scenario for them to change that. And I think if we have requirements like, you have to delete all your vulnerabilities, or, I think we can put some documentation and some caveats around that sort of a scenario, because it really is an edge case scenario. It's not like customers are going and changing their, base image naming structure all the time.
That makes sense.
Is this the one that you're talking about, Sashi?
Yeah, it's not bad.
Cool.
So, and also Thiago and I had a discussion about the same. We could either do using a CI variable, or we could also use a configuration screen for the container scanning as we discussed. But it turns out that if we have multiple container scanning jobs running on the same pipeline, the configuration screen will not work, because in this configuration screen, we assume that there will be only one base image. But let's say a project that pushes two base images, like I think it's mentioned in the comments as well. Let's say it pushes a server and a UI image. We need two base images for those two images.
I think we do that, don't we? We do that in the container scanning analyzer itself. We publish a UBI image. Actually 4 images. We publish Trivian Gripe and Trivian Gripe for UBI.
Yeah, so I think Sashi's saying not identifying the container scanning image, but the image that's being scanned by.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So when we build those images, we scan them as part of our own build process.
Oh, right. You're saying we have 4 jobs.
We have, yeah.
Yeah, so we have that exact scenario. Yeah, I mean, another item on our roadmap, and maybe we combine these 2 efforts, but another item in our roadmap is to provide better support for scanning multiple images. I mean, a big part of that is in the UI, because there's no way to filter by image, but maybe we extend it so that a single container scanning job can scan multiple images as part of just one job. I don't know if that makes things easier or more complicated, but just a thought that, in a note that's on our roadmap anyway.
One, I think Sashi and I don't know if we talked about this, Sashi, in this context, but we were talking about, it's almost like you start parsing the Docker file ourselves to understand what the layer build is, right? Because then if you're building 4 images or 2 images in your container and they both use the same base image, so say I use a Ruby base image, and then I use one container builds one app and another container builds a different app, but they both use the same base image. Any vulnerability on that base image will be on both generated images, which means they're the same. Once you fix it, you fix it in both. And Docker understands that. If you look at if you do Docker info, you see the layers in there, and the manifest, not the manifest, what is it called? The digest will show that they're the same layer, but we don't have those smarts. We try to, we oversimplify it by just, building it based on the path. So we didn't explore it. We just figured that sounds very complicated. I don't know if you want to do that.
That's actually on our roadmap too. It's out there a ways. It's more, further out there, but we would like to get some more smarts about the actual layer where the vulnerabilities are introduced. Right now, container scanning is a very noisy scanning job. And so anything we can do to reduce that noise and consolidate vulnerabilities and reduce the overall work. If there's only one fix for the security team, really should only be one vulnerability in that case. And we should just notate within that vulnerability all the different areas that are affected by that same vulnerability. And so that way it's reducing just the clutter and the sheer volume of things that they have to go through and triage.
Something around that part that I proposed on the Threat Insights group was, and it wasn't even that original idea, because I think Philippe, he had the same sort of idea with a different take, but basically facilitate the triage by creating a reusable list of reusable triage that you can say, hey, I've already looked at these CVEs, and in the context of an application that runs in a certain way, these are all false positives. And an example can be, if you have an application that runs as a container, then anything that relates to Bluetooth, it's not going to affect you. Like you don't usually plug Bluetooth things in there, right? In a container. So then, even if you have duplicate vulnerabilities coming up, even if we can't track that properly, the file, it's almost like an allow list or deny list saying, hey, never worry about this. So a couple ways that this could be done. Philippe's idea is to have an include for an allow list and denied list that you can just say, hey, never worry about these. But those are cumbersome to create, right? You've got to bash in CVs and all that. Although you could script it, like you export things, and anyway. And what I was thinking was something that would be sort of built into the workflow. So as you're triaging things and you dismiss it, you say, oh, and by the way, add this to this exception list here. And then for each project, you could apply that list and say, anytime you scan things, apply this list here. And then at the end, you only get the stuff that you want. And I'm mentioning this because you made a helpful comment to me anyway. The objective is to reduce the noise. That could be a way to reduce the noise. I don't know. It's probably more work than.
Yeah, there are some other ways that we can get some good smarts around that too. All of that is further out on our roadmap than, really the foreseeable future. But if there is some sort of overlapping solution that also addresses, the main point of this epic, I'm definitely open to taking those on together if that helps make this easier in some way.
Yeah, I think that the best we got so far after many days of research is this base image idea. And did you think about how to solve the performance problem, Sashi? No pressure
So
if you
I have-
haven't, but
So I have two approaches in my mind. One we discussed already is introducing this new index table to reduce the DB performance overload, because currently the location fingerprint and the location data is inserted as a JSON, and filtering it using a field inside the JSON would be not so performant. So as we discussed, we introduced this new table that stores the image name and the appropriate vulnerability occurrence ID as an index table. That would reduce the load to some extent. And in terms of getting the value of the job variable or the CS base image variable, instead of reading it from the CI YAML file, I was thinking if we could modify the schema of the report, and from the container scanning GCS project, we could inject that into the schema report itself, so that in the Rails, when we read back the report JSON, we don't query the GitLab CI YAML file. Instead, we just go to the report file and get the base image value.
and how does the analyzer know what the base image should be?
So we have this variable anyway, right? So we could read the variable from the analyzer.
Right.
So that reads it and then injects it into the report JSON inside the location object, and the range that parses the report, instead of reading from the YAML file, it just reads from the JSON.
The infamous store report service, I think.
Yeah.
Which is undergoing a 13-point refactor, starting like this week or next week.
Is it related to the vulnerability read remap, or introducing this new table called vulnerability reads? So because I was thinking if that's going to happen, maybe we could
piggyback on it.
Yeah. So use the same for this as well, maybe.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll comment on that issue.
So Sam, do you think something like this would be too cumbersome for users?
I actually think that's a great idea if we can work out, the challenges that we have with it. Sounds like there's the performance challenge, but we have an idea on how to solve that. There's the challenge of how do we handle when users have multiple container scanning jobs running in the same pipeline. Could we just solve that by letting them specify a different CS base image variable for each job? Would that solve it?
That's the idea. Yeah, that would solve that.
Are there any other major challenges that are not resolved if we go with those two solutions?
No, nothing obvious to me. It's just a matter of breaking it down and estimating, refining and estimating.
Okay.
And usually sometimes things pop up when you're doing that. But I can't see. In terms of timing, though, by the time Threat Insights is done doing the store report service refactor, it'll make it easier to implement this, and we probably wouldn't want to do it before anyway. Not only because it would be harder, but because it's it'll be almost like throwaway work. Somebody's going to have to double up on that. And then the second part is what Sashi was saying, the index table. So the idea behind the index table is there's a very large table that's hard to search because there's some tricky joins. The index table or the lookup table relies on some triggers. Whenever things are inserted or updated, it updates that lookup table. So then when you're generating reports or doing comparisons, you're reading off that easy to query table. And then to display things, you go back to the source of truth, which are the occurrences tables. So that thing has it's about 10 points as well. And depending on what your thoughts are, Sam, on the roadmap, you could offer some help, for people in this team to pick that up instead of waiting for them. But either way, somebody will need to do that.
I mean, if that work is already underway, I'm inclined to just wait.
The first one is the store report service is on the way. The lookup table is not.
Got it.
So I would say, I don't know, a wild guess would be probably 0.6, 14.6 that would be available, maybe 0.5 if you're lucky.
Could you explain the lookup table work one more time?
Yeah, so there's a huge table called vulnerability occurrences. And in order to show reports, you need to do some joins with all the tables that are not that small either. So then the general idea is, instead of doing those joins and doing that query that's currently timing out actually for large projects, if you go to the GitLab group, GitLab org group, and go for a vulnerability report, you get some timeouts.
Right.
So instead of querying that big table, what you do is, as you write to the tables involved in the join, you update a separate table. And then when you're doing the query, you just query that smaller separate table. That's at a high level the idea behind it.
Right. Okay, so that's the triggers. So you're saying that would need to be done before we could have a performance solution.
Oh, you've been doing an amazing job with minutes, by the way, Sam. Let me just put some links here.
Sure.
I got the link to the issue in the docs.
So dependencies.
I see.
Store.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to have those triggers in place. What I'm not understanding fully, I guess, is what is our dependency on that work for what we're trying to do? Are we trying to read from that? Would we need to read from that vulnerability occurrences table in a way that we're not doing today?
So the first challenge is that what Sashi described in terms of deduplicating. All that deduplication work happens in this store report service. So that's the thing that reads the JSON file, parses the security report, then goes and compares and deduplicate things. So that service is a beast and it's hard to work with. So we want to wait for the refactor. The second one is this one here, it's called the vulnerability read model. Vulnerability read model, which is tackling the performance issue that Sashi is talking about. So we would have the same issue. Our issue is a little bit different. It's not so much that the table is big, but that doesn't help. It's because to do the lookup that's being proposed in his solution, that's a substring in a column. You can't index that because it's basically JSON in a column. So you'd need to read every row, parse the JSON, and then search for what you're looking for in the JSON. And an easier way to do that is just, all right, if you need this part of the JSON, just put that on that lookup table.
I see. So that would be one of the triggers that would be implemented, is to store.
We would update that trigger to say, hey, and by the way, when you update that, also put this in because we need to search based on this.
Yeah, so I think it's reasonable for us to take that piece on. We have a strong interest in having that trigger created. So I don't mind helping out in creating that trigger, the trigger that we need to solve for that performance problem. I don't think we should get involved in the store report service. I think we should just wait for them to finish that refactor, if that helps with the prioritization there. I know we're over time. Do you have time to stay on for a little bit?
It's the middle of my day. I should hope that I can be here way longer than you said.
Sounds good.
Don't make me look bad. So I've pasted 2 of those issues for the vulnerability reads. I'll have a chat to the threat insights engineers to see if it would make sense to do that before doing the refactor, because then we could parallelize that work, right? Instead of doing one after the other, we'll do them at the same time.
Sense to help contribute to how much do you have a sense, Tiago, for how much are we taking on by helping out with that performance issue, the trigger, creating a trigger to store those?
It hasn't been finished refining, and it's kind of hard to look at, but I'm looking at 6 issues at least. Give it another average of 2 points, probably 12 points there. So it would probably be, I'd call that a whole engineer dedicated to that for a whole milestone.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not exactly cheap.
We could solve for what we need with, taking on just 1 or 2 of those issues.
I mean, anything helps, right? Even if it just means we'll be waiting less, but we probably wouldn't, be able to make this feature live without that performance work. You could throw in a feature flag to say, hey, this won't be turned on until that performance is resolved, and then you can just wait. But at some point you need to do it.
So I guess what I'm asking is, do we have to have all 6 of those issues?
Yes.
complete, or can we just do 1 or 2 of them and get what we need out of it?
No, it needs all of it. It's just broken down in the small pieces, but until you do the last one, you're not using all that you've done.
Okay.
It's basically create a lookup table, now create the trigger in one place, create the other trigger, and then at the end of everything, now start using the lookup table.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And adding additional fields is trivial to setting up the whole process. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, thanks for taking the time to clarify that for me. I'm just trying to get a sense for how much we might be taking on by diving into all of that. I mean,
like if in your place, I probably wait.
yeah.
And if it happens to, like, once it's all refined and ready to go, if you find that it's best to help, then jump in and I can coordinate between the 2 groups. But I don't see, without helping threat insights, I don't see us doing this much sooner than 13.6. Sorry, 14.6.
14.6. So that's reasonable. Are we blocked on all of the other work that has to be done, or can we, do all of the other work and wait for that trigger to be put in place so that we can, turn it on? It sounds like you were suggesting we could, right? We could put this behind a
we might be able to. Sashi, what do you think? Do you think there would be a way to throw a feature flag there to disable that expensive query?
Yeah, maybe we could go with having feature flag and having the index or expensive query at first place for the investigation. Then after we have the trigger and the index table, we could move on to that.
I would say though that we are blocked on the store report service.
Yeah, that makes
that's
sense.
kind of blocking.
When do you think that will be complete, or do you know?
I've been asked this question earlier today, and I was really reluctant to give a number because the estimate is at 13, which means it's entering the field of fiction. But
Okay.
I was optimistic to get it in 14.3.
Okay, so we wouldn't even start. So I'm glad we have a plan here. I think we'll probably want to just document this really well. And then put it on the shelf, and then likely it makes sense to pick this up, after that refactor is done in 14.3 or 14.4.
Yep.
All the work that we can, and then we'll see, where the work is at that point for the trigger work. Maybe we'll pitch in and help out some there. Maybe we won't. Maybe it'll be done by then. I
Yeah.
think we'll kind of reevaluate it in 14.3 or 4. So I'm going to leave it there. I don't talk about this much, but my priorities are a little bit flexible in the sense that, I've got my priority order, but if there's a good reason to not follow the priority order, then, let's do that. We'll stay there as number 2, but if we want to move down to number 3 or 4, or even pick up some of the other, actually start working on container host security a little bit, because we haven't done that in a really long time.
Show Falco some love.
Right.
So Sashi, just to keep me honest, do you agree with that there's really not much we can do without touching the store report service or report store service?
We could still do it, but I'm still not sure how the refactor would end up, because we have this parser, which is actually the core of the logic that does, or at least what we want. If the refactor doesn't touch the parser, I think it would be fine to start.
Yeah.
But I'd still maybe wait for the refactor, or just see what.
You could, for example, work on the new variable on the base and not do anything with it, right? Because you're going to have to update the schema anyway for the container security report. That's work that can be done, Sam. If you don't mind, starting something that's going to be really long-winded, because there will be a hiatus. Am I pronouncing that right?
We could. I would say that's partially up to you on the engineering team. I don't have a super strong opinion there, but it's not like we're going to be delivering any value to customers by picking it up and then stopping and picking it up again. So I don't know. I guess I have a weak preference for just waiting, just putting the whole thing on pause and picking it up in.
Yeah, me too. And we'll know how the refactor is going, so we could start. Hey, if it's looking like it's going to be done in a couple of weeks, then we can start that, right?
Yep, exactly. Okay, so yes, Sashi, if you're clear on the technical solution, why don't we document it really well? Let's just document it really well. Let's refine it as much as we reasonably can refine it at this point, with the assumption that, we're starting this after the store report service is done, being refactored. I mean, might be a little bit hard to fully refine since that's not done, so we don't know what we're dealing with, but let's just document it as well as we can, put it on the shelf, and pick up, either priority number 3, or put more work on priority number 1, or move over to container host security.
Yeah, I'll document all this in the Spike, or maybe in the Epic itself.
You cut out a bit, Sasha. I didn't get it.
Yeah, do that again.
So sorry, I'll document it on the Spike itself, or maybe on the Epic.
Yeah, let's move to the Epic description.
Yeah, I was going to suggest if you could move it to the Epic, then as the next step. Then after that, we could look at the planning breakdown for it and write the implementation issues. Basically, while this thing is in the hot cache, L1, L2, whatever one is the fast one, we'll write it off there, so we don't have to remember all this 3 months from now. Cool.
All right. I'm glad we got to I feel like we got to a good place here.
Yeah, I think we got something workable.
Sashi, did you have anything else you wanted to discuss? Questions, comments?
No, I'm clear. Thanks that we did this.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.